Hey everybody, welcome to day 10 of our virtual book study. We are on chapter 10. The title is White Fragility and the Rules of Engagement. Let's begin. Chapter 10, White Fragility and the Rules of Engagement. Given the dominant conceptualization of racism as individual acts of cruelty, it follows that only terrible people who consciously don't like people of color can enact racism. Though this conceptualization is misinformed, it is not benign. In fact, it functions beautifully to make it nearly impossible to engage in the necessary dialogue and self-reflection that can lead to change. Outrage at the suggestion of racism is often followed by righteous indignation about the manner in which the feedback was given. After years of working with my fellow whites, I have discovered, as I am sure have countless peoples of color, a set of unspoken rules for how to give white people feedback on our inevitable and often unconscious racist assumptions and patterns. I have found that the only way to give feedback without triggering white fragility is not to give it at all. Thus, the first rule is cardinal. Number 1, do not give me feedback on my racism under any circumstances. If you insist on breaking the cardinal rule, then you must follow these other rules. Number 2, proper tone is crucial. Feedback must be given calmly. If any emotion is displayed, the feedback is invalid and can be dismissed. Number 3, there must be trust between us. You must trust that I am in no way racist before you can give me feedback on my racism. Number 4, our relationship must be issue-free. If there are issues between us, you cannot give me feedback on racism until these unrelated issues are resolved. Number 5, feedback must be given immediately. If you wait too long, the feedback will be discounted because it was not given sooner. Number 6, you must give feedback privately, regardless of whether the incident occurred in front of other people. To give feedback in front of any others who were involved in the situation is to commit a serious social transgression. If you cannot protect me from embarrassment, the feedback is invalid and you are the transgressor. Number 7, you must be as indirect as possible. Directness is insensitive and will invalidate the feedback and require repair. Number 8, as a white person, I must feel completely safe during any discussion of race. Suggesting that I have racist assumptions or patterns will cause me to feel unsafe. So you will need to rebuild my trust by never giving me feedback again. Point of clarification. When I say, quote, safe, what I really mean is, quote, comfortable. Number 9, highlighting my racial privilege invalidates the form of oppression that I experience. Ergo, classism, sexism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, transphobia. We will then need to turn our attention to how you oppressed me. Number 10, you must acknowledge my intentions, always good, and agree that my good intentions cancel out the impact of my behavior. 11, to suggest my behavior had a racist impact is to have misunderstood me. You will need to allow me to explain myself until you can acknowledge that it is your misunderstanding. The contradictions in these rules are irrelevant. Their function is to obscure racism, protect white dominance, and regain white equilibrium, if they do so very effectively. Yet, from an understanding of racism as a system of unequal institutional power, we need to ask ourselves where these rules come from and whom they serve. Many of us actively working to interrupt racism continually hear complaints about the, quote, gotcha culture of white anti-racism. We are sometimes depicted as looking for every incident we can find so we can spring out, point our fingers, and shout, "You're a racist!" While certainly some white people arrogantly set themselves apart from other whites by acting in this way, in my experience this is not the norm. It is far more common for sincere white people to agonize over when and how to give feedback to a fellow white person, given the ubiquity of white fragility. White fragility punishes the person giving feedback and presses them back into silence. It also maintains white solidarity. The tacit agreement that we will protect white privilege and not hold each other accountable for our racism. When the individual giving the feedback is a person of color, the charge is, quote, playing the race card, and the consequences of white fragility are much more penalizing. Racism is the norm rather than the aberration. Feedback is key to our ability to recognize and repair our inevitable and often unaware collusion. In recognition of this, I try to follow these guidelines. Number 1, how, where, and when you give me feedback is irrelevant. It is feedback I want and need. Understanding that it is hard to give, I will take it any way I can get it. From my position of social, cultural, and institutional white power and privilege, I am perfectly safe and I can handle it. If I cannot handle it, it's on me to build my racial stamina. Number 2, thank you. The above guidelines rest on the understanding that there is no face to save and the game is up. I know that I have blind spots and unconscious investments in racism. My investments are reinforced every day in mainstream society. I did not set this system up, but it does unfairly benefit me. I do use it to my advantage, and I am responsible for interrupting it. I need to work hard to change my role in this system, but I can't do it alone. This understanding leads me to gratitude when others help me. White fragility is also evidenced in the need for so many white progressives to, quote, build trust before they can explore racism in workshops, support groups, and other educational forums. Many who are involved in racial justice education will recognize this white call to racial trust, which surfaces in a variety of ways. Facilitators devoting time to exercises intended to build trust, creating ground rules and guidelines to engender trust, and participant justifications for non-engagement. Ergo, quote, I am not going to share because I don't feel trust here. I have asked many colleagues just exactly what my fellow white people mean by the call for trust. I am confident the need for trust does not relate to having your wallet stolen or being physically assaulted, although at a subconscious level, that very well may be what is at play when the group is racially mixed, given the power of implicit bias and the relentless racist conditioning whites receive. Still, I believe that what it comes down to is this: I need to trust that you won't think I am racist before I can work on my racism. Consider the following common guidelines that have, quote, building trust at their base. Don't judge. Refraining from judgment is not humanly possible, so this guideline cannot be achieved or enforced as it is functionally meaningless. Don't make assumptions. The nature of an assumption is that you don't know you are making it, so this guideline cannot be achieved or enforced and is functionally meaningless. Assume good intentions. By emphasizing intentions over impact, this guideline privileges the intentions of the aggressor over the impact of their behavior on the target. In so doing, the aggressor's intentions become the most important issue. In essence, this guideline tells victims that as long as there was no intention to cause harm, they need to let go of the hurt and move on. In so doing, this guideline upholds white racial innocence while minimizing the impact of racism on people of color. Speak your truth. The admonition to speak the truth seems to be an unnecessary guideline. I have not seen a pattern of lying in these groups. Have I seen defensiveness, distancing behavior, silence, avoidance of taking risks? Yes, but have I observed people not speaking their truth? No. More importantly, what if your truth is that you are colorblind? Because no one can actually be colorblind in a racist society, the claim that you are colorblind is not a truth. It is a false belief. Yet this guideline can position all beliefs as truth, and as such, equally invalid. Given that the goal of anti-racist work is to identify and challenge racism, the misinformation that supports it, all perspectives are not equally valid. Some are rooted in racist ideology and need to be uncovered and challenged. We must distinguish between sharing your beliefs so that we can identify how they may be upholding racism and stating your beliefs as, quote, truths that cannot be challenged. Respect. The problem with this guideline is that respect is rarely defined. And what feels respectful to white people can be exactly what does not create a respectful environment for people of color. For example, white people often define as respectful an environment with no conflict, no expression or strong emotion, no challenging of racist patterns, and a focus on intentions over impact. But Such an atmosphere is exactly what creates an inauthentic, white norm-centered, and thus hostile environment for people of color. The unexamined assumption underlining these guidelines is that they can be universally applied, but because they do not account for unequal power relations, they do not function the same way across race. These guidelines are primarily driven by white fragility, and they are accommodations made to coddle white fragility. The very conditions that most white people insist on to remain comfortable are those that support the racial status quo: white centrality, dominance, and professed innocence. For people of color, the racial status quo is hostile and needs to be interrupted, not reinforced. The essential message of trust is be nice, and according to dominant white norms, the suggestion that someone is racist is not, quote, nice. Guidelines such as those above can also be turned against people of color. If you challenge my racial patterns, then you are assuming that what I did was rooted in racism. You shouldn't make assumptions. Or, quote, you are denying my truth that race has nothing to do with my actions. Now you are the transgressor. These conditions reproduce the weight of racism that people of color must constantly carry, putting aside their own needs to focus on white needs. An antidote to white fragility is to build up our stamina to bear witness to the pain of racism that we cause, not to impose conditions that require people of color to continually validate our denial. Of course, we would ideally guide each other in this work with compassion. It is much easier to look at something unwanted within ourselves if we don't feel judged or criticized. But what if someone does literally point a finger and boldly say, quote, you are racist? This accusation is a deep fear of progressive whites. It is still on me to identify my racist patterns and work to change them. If the point being made is aimed at the goal, then regardless of how carefully or indirectly it is being made, I need to focus on the overall point. The method of delivery cannot be used to delegitimize what is being illuminated or as an excuse of disengagement. To let go of the messenger and focus on the message is an advanced skill, and it is especially difficult to practice if someone comes at us with a self-righteous tone. If kindness gets us there faster, I am all for it. But I do not require anything from someone giving me feedback before I can engage with that feedback. Part of my processing of that feedback will be to separate it from its delivery and ascertain the essential point in its contribution to my growth. Many of us are not yet there, but this is what we need to work toward. I have been in many white racial justice groups wherein the participants expended much energy making sure people were kind and compassionate to each other and didn't, quote, break trust. So much energy, in fact, that we could no longer help each other see our problematic behaviors without breaking the norms of the group. So unless that kindness is combined with clarity and the courage to name and challenge racism, the approach protects white fragility and needs to be challenged. As I have tried to show throughout this book, white people raised in Western society are conditioned into a white supremacist worldview because it is the bedrock of our society and its institutions. Regardless of whether a parent told you that everyone was equal, or the poster in the hall of your white suburban school proclaimed the value of diversity, or you have traveled abroad, or you have people of color in your workplace or family, the ubiquitous socializing power of white supremacy cannot be avoided. The message circulates 24/7 and have little or nothing to do with intentions, awareness, or agreement. Entering the conversation with this understanding is freeing because it allows us to focus on how rather than if our racism is manifest. When we move beyond the good/bad binary, we become eager to identify our racist patterns because interrupting those patterns becomes more important than managing how we think we look to others. I repeat, stopping our racist patterns must be more important than working to convince others that we don't have them. We do have them, and people of color already know that we have them. Our efforts to prove otherwise are not convincing. An honest accounting of these patterns is no small task, given the power of white fragility and white solidarity, but it is necessary. Thank you for watching.